Ever feel like you're drowning in information? Trying to keep up with everything and just feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Like, how do you cut through all the noise and figure out what actually matters?
Exactly. And that's kind of the whole point of this deep dive we're doing here.
A deep dive, just for you.
Yeah. So today we're going deep on investment strategies and some really core principles.
And not just for financial success, but also for a richer life overall.
For sure. And to guide us on this journey, we're using William Green's book, Richer, Wiser, Happier.
Which is a phenomenal read, by the way.
Yeah, I loved it. It's packed with insights from these investing legends.
Like people who've spent decades navigating the markets and come out on top.
Right. So our mission today is to take their wisdom and pull out the stuff you can actually use.
The practical knowledge, the unexpected perspectives, the real aha moments.
Exactly. The stuff that can actually help you on your own financial path and honestly in life too.
Okay, let's jump in.
So one of the first things that really struck me was this concept of learning from the absolute best.
Almost like cloning their success.
Yeah, cloning.
Yeah.
And Mohnish Pabrai is a great example of that.
He openly talks about how he's been inspired by and in some ways copied Warren Buffett's strategies.
Which makes sense, right? Why reinvent the wheel if you can learn from the master?
Exactly. And for Pabrai, it wasn't just about making money, it was about winning the game.
Winning the game, yeah.
By understanding and playing by the rules that consistently lead to success.
Oh, I see. And he noticed a lot of people in the investment world were kind of missing the point.
Like a lot of fund managers are holding way too many stocks.
Like hundreds.
Right. And they're often overpaying for those stocks and trading too frequently.
It's like they think they can predict the future of hundreds of different companies.
Which is pretty much impossible.
And Pabrai has this great analogy about two gas stations.
One has amazing service and the other is just basic.
And of course, everyone flocks to the better one.
His point is when you see a superior strategy, just copy it.
It sounds so obvious, but it's amazing how often people try to be fancy and overthink it.
Right. And this ties in with Charlie Munger's fishing spear analogy.
Okay, I love Munger's analogies.
So it's like, you're a fisherman, you're patient, you wait, and then when you see a fat, juicy salmon...
You strike.
Exactly. And Pabrai applied this by fishing where the fish are.
Meaning? So
back in 2018, when U.S. markets felt overpriced, his offshore fund held 0 U.S. stocks.
0. Wow.
Instead, he looked at markets in India, China, South Korea.
So he was looking for undervalued opportunities elsewhere.
Exactly.
And then when COVID hit and the U.S. market tanked, particularly retail, he saw his chance.
That fat, juicy salmon.
Right. He made a big bet on Seritage growth properties.
Which was basically a gamble that the short-term panic was creating a huge long-term opportunity.
And it paid off, right?
Big time.
So the takeaway here is sometimes the best opportunities come when everyone else is freaking out.
Exactly. When fear is high, that's often when the real bargains appear.
Now, Pabrai also had this early win with Satyam Computer Services.
That he bought back in 1995 when it was super undervalued.
So he spotted a great opportunity early on.
Right. And he understood the business because he was in a related industry himself.
So he had that insider knowledge.
But here's the key. He sold his stake in 2000 when it became massively overvalued.
So he made a huge profit and got out at the right time.
Exactly. And he actually compared this to Forrest Gump investing in Apple.
Some kind of fruit company.
Right. Just pure luck at first, but then knowing when to cash out.
Which is a huge part of successful investing. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about buying smart, it's also knowing when to sell.
So going back to this cloning Buffett idea, Pabrai didn't just copy stock-picking strategies.
He modeled his investment partnership after Buffett's too.
Meaning?
No annual management fee, just a performance-based fee if profits exceeded 6%.
So aligning incentives, right?
Exactly. Making sure the investor and the manager are both aiming for the same goal.
To actually make money.
Right. And Pabrai, like Buffett, had his too hard pile for companies that were just too complex.
He even had a photo of Buffett's too hard box as a reminder.
And companies like Enron and Valiant Pharmaceuticals went straight into that pile.
Just too messy, too risky.
So the lesson here is, if you don't truly understand a business, it's often better to walk away.
Keep it simple.
Exactly.
Then there was his investment in IPSEO, a steel producer.
Which was a classic no-brainer investment.
Meaning?
He bought shares at around $44 when the company had $15 per share in cash.
Oh, wow. So he was basically getting the underlying assets for a steal.
Right, and they were projected to generate another $26 per share in the next 2 years.
So he was buying something for way less than it was actually worth,
This is the margin of safety.
which is a core principle in value investing.
You buy something for less than its true value, so you have a cushion against potential mistakes.
It's like having a safety net.
Exactly.
But it's interesting, though, how both Pabrai and Buffett have adapted their strategies to fit their personalities.
Right. Buffett's more hands-off with his decentralized structure at Berkshire.
While Pabrai has his own unique routine of reading and deep thinking.
So the lesson here is you can learn from the best, but you got to tailor it to who you are.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
And this idea extends beyond just investing with parrot. Pabrai and his friend Guy Spire talk about the inner scorecard.
Which is basically how you measure your own success.
Like, are you living up to your own standard?
Right. And they pointed to people like Buffett, Munger, Gandhi Mandela.
These are people driven by an internal sense of what's right.
Not just external recognition.
So it's about defining your own values and living by them.
Exactly.
Now, Pabrai also has this really interesting approach to relationships.
He's very deliberate about it.
He asks himself, will having a relationship with this person make me better or worse?
And if it's worse, he cuts them out.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
It is, but it shows how seriously he takes the influence of the people around him.
Like you become who you surround yourself with.
Right, so it's about choosing to be around people who lift you up.
And finally, Pabrai was really inspired by Swami Vivekananda's idea of focusing intensely on one idea.
Like making it your life's mission.
And letting go of everything else that distracts you.
Which makes sense if you think about it.
Like, to really master something, you need that level of focus.
Right, you can't be scattered.
Now, as Pabrai became more successful, he started to think more about philanthropy.
And again, he looked to Buffett for inspiration.
Because Buffett has talked a lot about how money doesn't necessarily buy happiness.
Beyond a certain point.
Right. And it seems like a lot of these successful investors are looking for something more.
Something beyond just profits.
Absolutely. So Pabrai founded Dakshana, this incredible organization that helps underprivileged students in India.
They coach them to get into top universities and medical schools.
And what's amazing is they do it in this really low-cost, high-impact way.
It's all about efficiency and making a real difference.
And Pabrai was so committed to this, he even visited Bihar, which is known as the kidnapping capital of India. He hired security just to go there and see the program firsthand.
That's dedication.
It wasn't just about writing a check. He wanted to be involved.
And Buffett was so impressed with Dakshana, he shared their report with Munger and Bill Gates.
He even praised Pabrai publicly for his philanthropic work.
Which is a pretty big endorsement.
It shows that Pabrai wasn't just successful in investing, he was also using his wealth to make a real difference.
Now, we should also talk about the tension between concentrated investments and risk.
Like Pabrai made some big bets on Fiat Chrysler and GM warrants.
And his friend Guy Spire found that level of concentration pretty scary.
Even though those bets ultimately paid off.
It highlights the importance of understanding your own risk tolerance.
Like, how much are you willing to lose?
Right. Because concentrated bets can lead to huge gains, but also big losses.
It's a balancing act.
Now, the book also explores the psychology of successful investors.
And how it compares to the psychology of successful CEOs.
And it turns out there's some interesting differences.
Like CEOs tend to be more emotionally intelligent and team-oriented.
While contrarian investors are often loners.
They're comfortable going against the grain.
Like Shelby Davis and his father, both legendary investors.
Shelby described his dad as very deeply a loner, always immersed in research.
It was lonely work, he said.
And this makes sense, right? To find undervalued opportunities, you often need to think differently.
You need to be comfortable being the odd one out.
Now let's talk about John Templeton, another investing giant.
He was known for his incredibly disciplined and analytical approach.
And he had this really unique background. He was a Rhodes Scholar who studied law.
But he spent all his free time reading about business.
So he was really self-taught in a lot of ways.
Which shows you don't need a formal education to become an expert.
Right.
And Templeton was famous for his contrarian investing.
Especially during the Great Depression.
When everyone was selling, he was buying.
And he had this great quote. Absolutely nothing will make a stock go down to an extremely low price except for other people urgently trying to sell.
So he saw opportunity in everyone else's fear.
And he famously invested in Missouri Pacific when it was super depressed.
He saw the potential upside was huge compared to the downside risk.
And his only regret was selling those shares too soon.
He wished he had held on longer.
Which highlights the importance of patience.
Absolutely.
Now, Templeton was also incredibly analytical, even when it came to personal decisions.
Like choosing where to live.
He made these detailed lists of advantages for different locations.
He was very systematic about it.
And he also stressed the importance of thorough research.
He said, the only way to make money in the market is to know more than the other person.
So knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And going back to patience, Templeton bought U.S. stocks at the start of World War II.
When they were incredibly undervalued.
Even though he couldn't predict when the market would recover.
Right. And he compared it to the Dutch buying Manhattan for $24 in 1626.
He said if they had invested that money at 8%, it would be worth far more than Manhattan today.
So the key is to think long-term.
And let compounding work its magic.
Now, it's interesting, the author William Green didn't necessarily like Templeton as a person.
He found him kind of dry and formal.
But he still respected his intellect and his principles.
Which I think is a good reminder that you can learn from people you don't necessarily like.
Sometimes the best insights come from unexpected places.
And Templeton was also incredibly disciplined with his own finances.
He saved a huge portion of his income even after becoming super wealthy.
He famously always flew coach.
He thought it was a waste of money to fly first class.
He also hated debt and preferred to pay for everything in cash.
So he lived by his principles.
Now let's talk about Howard Marks. He brings up this really important idea about the role of luck.
He actually compiled a list of all the lucky breaks he had in his career.
Like being in the right place at the right time?
Which is something we often overlook.
We tend to think success is all about skill and hard work.
But luck definitely plays a role.
And recognizing that helps keep our egos in check.
It's humbling to realize that we're not always in control.
But despite acknowledging the role of luck, Marx was never complacent.
He knew that being overly confident could be dangerous.
Especially when the market is doing well.
He even coined the term the perversity of risk.
Meaning?
That risk is often highest when people are feeling the most confident.
Like when everyone thinks nothing can go wrong?
Exactly. And Marx actually wrote a memo in 2007 warning about the dangers in the market.
He saw the warning signs before the financial crisis.
So he was ahead of the curve.
And then during the crisis, while everyone was panicking, he stayed calm.
He wrote a memo called, "Most of the Time, the End of the World Doesn't Happen."
Which is a pretty reassuring title.
He had this binary view, either the world ends or it doesn't.
And if it doesn't, then buying quality assets at discounted prices is a great opportunity.
So he was able to take advantage of the situation.
While everyone else was frozen by fear.
And he tells this story about a pension fund manager who was obsessed with worst-case scenarios.
And it made Marx realize that negativity has its limits.
True skepticism isn't about being pessimistic all the time.
It's about questioning everything, whether it's optimism or pessimism.
So you got to be able to see both sides.
Now, the book also brings up this Buddhist concept of transience.
Which is the idea that everything is constantly changing.
Nothing stays the same forever.
And this applies to financial markets, too.
Like, we shouldn't be surprised when market trends shift.
It's just the natural order of things.
And this understanding of transience leads to the idea of building unfragile portfolios and unfragile lives.
Meaning?
Avoiding too much debt and leverage.
Because when things change, you don't want to be overexposed.
Jean-Marie Aveyard had this great principle: because the future is uncertain, you want to minimize your risk.
So it's about playing it safe.
And the book talks about Benjamin Graham, who went through some serious financial hardship early in his life.
His family lost a lot of money.
And it really shaped his investment philosophy.
He became obsessed with survival and avoiding catastrophic losses.
So he was all about minimizing risk.
Now, Aveyard himself faced a lot of pressure during the dot-com bubble.
Because he refused to invest in those soaring tech stocks.
He was called half senile by one executive.
But he stuck to his principles.
And he was right in the end.
Which is a good reminder that sometimes you got to go against the crowd.
Especially when everyone else is caught up in a frenzy.
Now, Berkshire Hathaway is a great example of a resilient organization.
They have huge cash reserves, and they focus on high-quality businesses.
They're built to weather any storm.
Buffett and Munger have always prioritized long-term stability.
And Irving Kahn, who lived to be 109, had an amazing career on Wall Street.
He started in 1928.
He saw it all.
And he stressed the importance of avoiding big losses.
He said focus on building a shock-resistant portfolio.
Don't get caught up in trying to beat the market every quarter.
Just stay in the game for the long haul.
And McLennan from First Eagle Global has this price for fade approach.
He assumes all businesses are eventually going to fade away.
So he only buys things at a big discount.
to compensate for that eventual decline.
He also held a lot of cash before the COVID crash.
So he was prepared.
And both Kahn and McLennan warned against overconfidence and complacency.
Which are two of the biggest dangers for investors.
Especially when things are going well, it's easy to get cocky.
And that's when you make the biggest mistakes.
So stay humble.
Now, Joel Greenblatt talks about the importance of having a clear investment strategy.
And sticking to it even when it's not working in the short term.
He's famous for his magic formula,
Which focuses on companies with high returns on capital and high earnings yields.
but he says the key is to really understand why your strategy works.
And have the discipline to stick with it through thick and thin.
Now, Nick Sleep and Kai Zakaria, who ran the Nomad Investment Partnership,
They made quality their guiding principle.
and they focused on this long-term view they called destination analysis.
Like imagining where a company would be in many years.
And they were contrarian investors. They made big investments during crises.
Like the Asian financial crisis and the dot-com bubble.
They saw opportunity when everyone else was running away.
And they even found profitable investments in Zimbabwe.
Talk about contrarian.
And they had this long-term vision for companies like Costco and Amazon.
They saw the power of deferred gratification and building sustainable competitive advantages.
And they distilled 5 key lessons from their experience.
Prioritize quality, think long-term, act ethically, understand deferred rewards, and the power of compounding.
Those are some pretty solid principles.
Now, Tom Gaynor from Markle Corporation takes what he calls a radically moderate approach.
He's all about consistency and avoiding extremes.
He focuses on building sustainable habits.
And his discipline and steadiness have been key to his success.
He's proof that slow and steady can win the race.
And the book highlights a bunch of other successful investors, too.
Like Chris Davis, Lawrence Cunningham, Bill Nygren, Francois Rochon,
Arnold Vandenberg, Robert Lances, Li Lu,
Catherine Gertz.
each with their own unique approach, but there are some common themes.
Long-term thinking focusing on value-independent thinking. And all this leads to what the book calls the art of subtraction.
Which is basically focusing on your strengths and what really matters.
And cutting out all the distractions.
And this is where Charlie Munger comes in again, with his emphasis on avoiding stupidity.
Which sounds simple, but it's actually quite profound.
It's not about being a genius. It's about not making dumb mistakes.
And he has this great technique called inversion
Where you think about how to make something fail.
to identify the key elements for success.
It's like thinking in reverse.
And Munger also made a point of studying the mistakes of others.
So he could avoid repeating them.
So what are some ways you can apply this inversion thinking in your own life?
Maybe if you're starting a project, think about all the ways it could go wrong.
That might help you spot potential problems before they happen.
And the book stresses the importance of avoiding catastrophic errors.
Like overpaying for an asset or being overconfident in your abilities.
It's also crucial to align incentives and partner with people of integrity.
Because if your incentives are misaligned, it can lead to bad decisions.
And Munger talks about this automatic shutoff device in our minds.
Which is our tendency to cling to our beliefs even when they're wrong.
We all have this bias.
And he points out some common psychological tendencies that can cloud our judgment.
Like excessive self-regard, over-optimism, and denial.
We all fall into these traps.
So it's important to be aware of them.
The book also highlights the importance of challenging your own beliefs.
Like Warren Buffett and Munger did.
They were always questioning their assumptions,
And one tool for doing this is the Devil's Advocate review.
where you force yourself to argue against your own ideas.
To see if they hold up.
And Munger suggests rewriting his list of cognitive errors in your own words,
To really internalize them.
so you can recognize them when they pop up.
Now, finally, Munger talks about the importance of a lifestyle that promotes calm resilience.
He seems to have a natural lack of fear when it comes to investing.
But he recognizes that not everyone is wired that way.
So he stresses the importance of managing your emotions.
And he's a big advocate for a win-win philosophy.
He believes in being a good partner in all aspects of life.
And he has a very pragmatic approach to dealing with challenges.
Accept them, and then figure out how to solve them.
He's all about finding solutions.
The book wraps up by mentioning some other successful investors and their principles.
Like Ed Thorpe, who emphasized fairness and living a principled life.
Irving Kahn, who talked about the importance of family health, meaningful work, and continuous learning.
And Jeffrey Karp, who left the hedge fund world to find a more fulfilling life.
They all achieved incredible financial success, but they were also searching for something more.
Something beyond just money.
And I think that's a key takeaway from this whole deep dive.
That a truly rich life is about more than just wealth
It's about purpose, relationships, integrity.
and finding meaning in what you do.
So as we wrap up, what are some of the biggest insights that resonated with you?
What are some things you can take away and apply to your own life?
You've now gotten a glimpse into the minds of some of the greatest investors of all time.
What can you learn from their wisdom?
How can you use their principles to make better decisions, not just financially, but in all areas of your life?
Think about it.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive. Hopefully it's giving you some food for thought and some practical insights that you can apply to your own journey towards a richer, wiser, and happier life.
I think it has. And remember, it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. Enjoy the ride.